Hello there and welcome. This video is going to be about querying third-party APIs from within GraphQL. So we're going to finish making this app that will query some weather data and a daily horoscope from two separate third-party APIs, and we'll be doing that querying from within a GraphQL query. So if you've done some basic work with GraphQL, like basic querying and some mutations perhaps, and you're ready to do something a little more complicated, like incorporating third-party data, this video might prove very useful for you. So let's jump into it. Okay, so just a real quick overview of this app. We have a client and server folder. The client is a Vite app with Apollo client incorporated into it, allowing us to make GraphQL queries from the client. And on the server, we have GraphQL running, and we have a couple of types set up. We have user and auth set up, and we also have some auth middleware set up in our server, allowing us to access the currently logged in user at any time just by accessing the context in any of these resolvers. So that's just a real quick overview. What we want to do is start working on fetching this third-party API data so that we can get some weather and horoscope data. So let's just get started on that. We'll go into our server folder. We'll head into schemas and find our Typedefs files. So I know that I want to make a new type. So far I have user and auth. I have a query for getting users and a couple of mutations for signing up and logging in. This new type will represent the data that we get from our dashboard. The weather and horoscope data, that is. So I will go ahead and define that type, and I'll call it dashboard data. And maybe I don't know exactly what this type looks like yet. I don't know all of the fields yet, but GraphQL will yell at me if I don't at least give it one. So I'll give it one called weather, and I'll expect that to be a string. That'll be like the description of the weather. So now that we have a basic type set up, I can set up a query. I'll call it dashboard, and it will return data in the type of dashboard data. So just by doing that, that allows me to start working on my resolver. I have one partially set up here. I have it commented out because GraphQL will yell at me if I have a resolver set up that doesn't exist in the Typedefs. But now there is one that exists in the Typedefs called dashboard. So we can start having a look here. And so this is where the hard work of all the fetching is occurring. I'm importing two functions that I made that get weather from a third-party API and store the JSON to this variable, and the same with the horoscope data, saving it to this variable. It's utilizing the context to get the currently logged in user's city property and their sign property. When you sign up, you have to fill out a city and you have to select an astrological sign. And that's enough information to get the appropriate weather and horoscope data. But so far, this resolver is doing nothing but console logging that information. So what we can do is we can call this query from within our sandbox. So what that means is going to our browser and going to our server port /GraphQL. I can start building a new query from scratch. I'm going to do the dashboard query, and I'll select the weather field, and I'll go ahead and run this. I get null because this resolver isn't returning anything. And also I could have run into an issue if there was no, if this token wasn't valid. This resolver relies on there being a logged in user. And so what I could have done is hit my login query and grabbed a token, and then gone back to this dashboard query and add an authorization header. And you would just say bearer space and then paste the token. And now I'm firing that same query again, but I'm not getting any data. But what I am getting is a console log in my terminal with the weather and horoscope data coming from these two lines here. This allows me to start parsing through the JSON that I get back from these APIs and forming the object that I'm going to return from this resolver. I want it to include some weather and horoscope information. So for example, I know that I want there to be that weather field that'll represent the description. So I just need to go to weather data dot weather index 0, because this is an array, dot description. So we'll go to weather data dot weather index 0 dot description. Okay, and the other fields I have them sort of pre-made here. I'll actually just go ahead and just paste them all here. And so this just involves parsing through the other fields here, accessing this icon here and accessing the temperature, which is down here in the main area. I'm doing a math.floor to round it down to convert it to an integer. And then, before that, actually, I am converting it from Kelvin to Fahrenheit. For some reason, they like to give you Kelvin. And then the horoscope, that comes from the second console log here. I'm just getting this property here, which has like a paragraph, the daily horoscope. So this is all the data that I need. I'm now returning this object with 4 fields. That's pretty cool. I just need now to make sure that my typedef has these 4 fields in it and expects the correct types. So I still need to add weather icon, temperature, and horoscope. Okay, so here's that type. We're going to add weather icon, and that's a string. We need to add temperature, and that's an integer. And we need to add horoscope, and that is another string. So now we can test our query here in the sandbox again, add those new fields that we just added, and hope that we get some good data. This looks pretty good to me. We have a weather description, a temperature that looks correct, a horoscope paragraph, and a weather icon that looks correct. So that's pretty cool. So, I didn't take you through all of the fetching and all of that, because I assume you know how to fetch from third-party APIs and get the JSON data. What I'm just showing you that you need to do is to make sure that your resolver returns an object with some clearly defined fields and that your typedef matches that object shape. So now dashboard data is an object with these 4 fields that our query can now expect. So I can take this whole query, copy it, and make sure that on the client, my queries that I am calling on the client match that. Right now it doesn't, but I can just pop that in there, replace that, and this will look good. So let's take a look at what's going on the client here. The way I've set it up is that once you're logged in, you will land on the home page, and the home page component is importing that very query that we were just looking at from this utils folder. There it is. And then the home page will call useQuery on that query. And we get these loading and data variables. And then I create these 4 variables I create these 4 variables and I parse through the data object to get the specific properties that I need for those variables. I use the question mark here because initially data will be undefined. So if it is undefined, I'll initially get an empty string for those data, and that's fine. So with these clearly defined variables, I can now, inside of my component, just use them to display the weather description or to incorporate the weather icon into this source URL for an image, etc. Temperature is over here, horoscope is over here. So now, if I go to this app, voila, it's working. I've clearly run this a few times. I'm up to mic 3 now. Let's go ahead and create mic 4. We'll just use that password. Oh wait, I gotta sign up. Mic 4. And, we'll put him in Sydney. We'll assume that it knows that that's in Australia. and we'll select Scorpio. This is arbitrary. I am not into astrology, FYI. But as you can see, it is getting the Scorpio horoscope, so that's working great. And I'm assuming that the weather in Sydney is indeed 72, although that is exactly what it said for San Francisco. So let's have a look. Let's make sure our weather thing is actually functioning correctly, and we'll choose Detroit. And we'll go with Aries, Mike 5. Uh-oh. So let's have a look at our resolver. I actually wasn't expecting this. It's a little strange that the temperature is always being the same, but yeah, I'm getting San Francisco every single time. So somewhere in my code, I'm doing something wrong, and I think I know where it is. It's inside of these fetching functions. So I'm going to find my getWeather function, and that is inside of utils, fetch functions, and I probably just hard-coded San Francisco into the city. So that would be down here. Yep, sure enough, here it is. So maybe we can just do this on the fly here. So I'm passing in the city as an argument, but in the fetch functions, I did not use this location variable. So we will replace this here, Q equals San Francisco, and we'll go like this and add in location. Let's try that again. Okay, we're gonna log out. We'll create Mike 6. And we'll go with Detroit again, Aries. That's a little more reasonable. It does get quite warm in Michigan in the summer. All right, we're working now. So let's review what we did. There was a little bit of debugging there, but the first thing I did is I visited the server and I went to my Typedefs, and I knew that I wanted to define a new type, and I called it dashboard data. I didn't know what that data would look like, so all I did was fill out one field, and then I created a query that would get dashboard data. I then started to work on my resolver, which initially wasn't returning any of these. It was simply console logging the results from my data fetching. But using those console logs, I was able to add the fields that I wanted to my return object. So I felt satisfied with how those looked. So I was able to then go back to the Typedefs and add those 4 fields in. Then I headed to the Apollo sandbox by going to my server port /GraphQL, and I could start testing that query. Since those fields were added to the Typedefs, they all showed up here, and I could just fill them out and try it out. And sure enough, I got data that looked good, which meant that this was a good query. I could copy it and add it to my client-side queries, which I did here. And then all of the hard work of setting up the front-end component, and rendering all that data was already done, because the key point of this demonstration was how to shape your Typedefs and resolvers so that you could return data from a third-party API and have it resolve correctly in your GraphQL queries. So the key basically was to make sure that what was being returned by your resolver had the correct shape, in that it corresponded with your typedef. And then it was a matter of testing and all that. This query didn't require any parameters because I was using the context to get the city and the sign. That made it a little easier. I didn't have to supply any parameters for this query. But I hope you had fun watching this video, and I hope that this gives you a solid understanding of how to build third-party API queries inside of your GraphQL queries. Feel free to look through this code and use it as a reference. It could serve useful. It won't work right away because the API keys are stored as environmental variables, but they're both free APIs. It would be easy for you to get keys if you really wanted to get this thing up and running. And there you have it. I hope you guys found this useful, and I hope you're ready to do some cool queries with GraphQL. Alrighty, folks. Take care and happy coding.